you're saying I should have already eaten my cookies.
You can just turn the screen off. You could just eat them on screen. I think we're all past that point. And I can start by introducing myself. So my name's Katie McLean, and I work with Clean Annapolis River Project. We're a relatively small environmental non-government organization with an office located in Annapolis Royal, and we focus on the Annapolis watershed area. So kind of roughly Aylesford through Digby is typically our area of focus for projects. And then I should see Joanna and Tim if you want to do any introductions or anything before I jump into the training part, but we kind of have a cool opportunity, and we'll see how it plays out with COVID-19 through the season, to kind of share some of our experience working with volunteers on wood turtle surveys and hoping to get up there and help start something similar in your area.
Yeah, well, we were full speed ahead until all this exploded, I guess is the right word for it. I haven't been paying as much attention. How are things up in your neck of the woods? Like, is it?
We don't have a lot of cases, but hopefully it stays that way. And we've got the same, I mean, we all have the same 2-week restrictions. So I still left in my calendar the in-person training weekend, which comes after this 2-week break, in hopes that we're all really well behaved and things turn around and we can get out after that.
I may not be able to come either way because we're under a month of restrictions.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, for me, it might depend on how that goes. I mean, maybe our numbers go right down, but at the moment they're still quite high. So
we'll just have to kind of figure it out as it happens, I think.
Yeah, play it by ear. Yeah.
Is that HRM specific, or you mean the Nature Trust?
No, that's HRM specific, and
I
think Southern Hants County.
So before I jump over and share my slides, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I should introduce myself officially for those I haven't met. I'm Joanna Skomorowski. I'm the stewardship coordinator for the Nova Scotia Nature Trust. So one of the things that we're in the process of figuring out is how better to steward the properties that have turtles. And in the St. Mary's River, that mainly means wood turtles. So we're really grateful to Katie for her expertise and her willingness to partner with us in this. And our good teammates over at the St. Mary's River Association were also interested.
Okay, so I apologize in advance. I'm borrowing the same slide deck I use for our area. So the title doesn't quite apply, but the real meat of the content is totally applicable. And I'm just gonna figure out how to move my Zoom control so I can maximize the screen. Oh, it's blocking it. There, full screen. So can you guys all see that, and can you all hear me fairly clearly?
Yeah, that's good.
Yep, that's good.
So I'm by no means an expert on anything, but for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I've been involved in the wood turtle program with CARP. So that's where the bulk of my experience with wood turtles has come from. So that's our slide area. And I guess just because I don't know everyone who's joined us today and even how familiar they are with the wood turtle and turtle species in Nova Scotia, some of this will start at the basics, but is going to be focused more on visual surveys themselves rather than wood turtle ecology. But there's a few people on this call I know who have a ton of knowledge, so I don't see why we can't keep it pretty informal. And if there's things people want to jump in and add, then that's great. So up here we have the 4 species of turtles that we might find native to Nova Scotia. So on the top left is the eastern painted turtle, which is probably the most common and well known. And then just below that is the common snapping turtle, which I also find people have a pretty good handle on. Most people have come across a snapping turtle and can recognize them pretty well. And then on the right-hand side are less common turtles. So has anyone on here done any blendings turtle work before, like maybe with Keji or in other places?
I have, but Katie, I can still just see the first slide. I can't see the next slide.
Oh, that's
I'm not
weird.
seeing any snapping turtles or blendings turtles.
Okay. Oh, it says sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. What about now?
There you go.
Oh, now I can.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
great.
good. We're just not going full screen and not happy.
Okay.
So thanks for saying that, because I would have
Like, no,
continued
that's
on
a
with
wood
this
turtle, and
full
that's
screen.
also a wood turtle.
Yeah.
That's
So
not
yeah,
a snapping turtle.
top left painted turtle, bottom left snapping turtle. Then our blandings turtle. So people who maybe have been to Keji, you'd probably seen signage out for turtles, and it's the blandings turtle that they have quite a large conservation program for. And then our focus of the night is on the bottom right hand side, which is the wood turtle. So has that really nice bright orange coloration on the limbs, which is one of the identifying features that you can use to differentiate them from our other species. Maybe while I have all four up here, the photo doesn't necessarily show it well, but I do find that people will fairly often or potentially confuse snapping turtles and wood turtles, because they do both have kind of rough carapaces. So that top shell, the carapace, especially at first glance, or if they're quite covered in mud, you might not notice the difference. But once you really start to look at the shape, maybe potentially the size,
After it tries to bite you.
yeah, the shape of the face, like there are a lot of differences. But yeah, sometimes when you're just quickly at first glance, you see a shell, it's like, oh, wood turtle, nope, snapping turtle, which is exciting too. And in Nova Scotia, I'm going to jump through this slide pretty fast, but this is to explain different schemes for listing species as at risk. We have both our Federal Species at Risk Act and the Nova Scotia Endangered Species Act, under which the wood turtle is listed as threatened for both. And then if you wanted to look at an international scheme for rankings, last I checked, and I haven't updated this slide, I don't think it's changed, but IUCN had wood turtles listed as endangered, actually. And so those are looking at different scales, provincial, federal, and international. And then up here, we have some more photos to take a look at some of the features you can use to identify whether it is indeed a wood turtle that you've come across when you're out doing surveys on the St. Mary's River. So on the top left, we have, again, the carapace, or the top shell. One of the things you can do to remember wood turtle is think about they have a rough or woody looking shell. I've heard that's how they got their name. I don't know if that's true, but one way to remember it. And you can see on this slide, and we'll talk about this more later, there's kind of growth rings on each of the scutes. So I think about the scutes as all the puzzle pieces that make up the shell. And that's actually one way you can start to get an approximate age of a turtle. We can't do that with some types of turtle, like the eastern painted turtle. If we take a look at the bottom left, it shows the plastron, or the bottom shell, which is going to be a yellowish color. I see yellow, maybe we all see color a little different, but yellow with black blotches, almost like the ink blot test type of image. And that's actually quite similar looking to the bottom of Blanding's turtles shells. But of course, most of the time we find these guys on visual surveys, they're going to be right side up or working on getting themselves righted. So you'll see all the other features are quite different. And you guys don't really live in Blanding's turtle territory anyway, so probably won't be encountering them. And then on the top right, we have another photo showing that nice bright orange coloration on the limbs, and we'd see it on the back limbs and around the tail as well. And Mark or others, I don't know if you have the same experience. It seems like male turtles have brighter orange and more, especially around the tail, and their rear limbs. They also have a fatter tail in general, so I guess more orange skin to cover the area.
Yeah, we've noticed, we didn't pay any particular notice to the sexual dimorphism along that way, but we certainly have found turtles that are almost red, which is kind of neat. So you'll get them red, orange, and then even just deep yellow, which is quite interesting itself. So, yeah.
And then the bottom, we have a juvenile. And to be honest, in the visual surveys we've done, I think once have come across a juvenile, except for when we're doing nest protection and, you know, they're in an enclosure and we're releasing them. But just happening upon juveniles has been really uncommon. And I think in one case we found a 2-year-old turtle. It was actually a high school student found it, Trent Jr. So it seems much less common to see these younger age classes during surveys, but certainly not impossible. Very exciting if that's what you end up finding.
Do you suppose that's just because everything eats them, so they're probably not basking quite as openly?
It may, I'd like, and that's something maybe others have a better answer for, but they do seem to be much more well hidden. They also camouflage incredibly well.
I think by virtue of the fact of their size, they're well hidden. They do hang out in slightly different habitats. So the smaller ones on the St. Mary's over the years, we've found many juveniles from the palm, size of the palm of your hand down to hatchling size. And the very smallest of ones sort of hang out in little ephemeral pools next to the river, things like that, where they're a little more protection, I think, from grasses. But it's definitely a skill, is seeing the little guys. I can recall a couple of students over the years that were particularly adept at finding juveniles. Most people tend to focus on the larger adult size, and that search image is what they stick with. So it's great if you found somebody who can actually, locate juveniles, because it's quite a skill.
Yeah, and juveniles are going to be roughly the size of a toonie when they hatch, and then grow slowly from there. They won't have that bright orange coloration. They're more of a solid gray, slatey color, so you don't get that bright orange to pick up on in the field. But they're quite unique from our other turtles once you know what you're looking for. We do still quite frequently get a kind of misobserved turtles reported to us, because it may have been that texture of the shell that threw people off. Or with painted turtles, I think it's the coloration, like the yellows and oranges you get on their skin, that sometimes just trick people, and they remember they're supposed to be orange. It's just not quite the same pattern. And this is a pretty rough map of distribution. You'll notice, I think, in this presentation, it's as vague as possible when it comes to locations, because we are recording it and sharing it freely, which is fantastic in terms of volunteer engagement, but we try to be quite sensitive about sharing information about specific locations for wood turtles. And to be honest, it's hard to find a really good range map unless you have maybe something that is based on the occurrence data for the province. So Nova Scotia really has a much more disjunct distribution. This pink area wouldn't have wood turtles spread across it. And in terms of habitat requirements, there's really 3 core types of habitat that are needed. So stream or river. So in your case, we've got the St. Mary's River, and have you guys done much searching on tributaries of the St. Mary's? I don't know that area at all, so.
Who wants to answer that? Let me say, yes, there's been a few dozen kilometers, or several dozen kilometers of tributary work done in the St. Mary's over the years. Much of the focus has been on the main river itself, but there's literally 1,600 kilometers of water in the watershed, and yeah, so only a small portion of the tributaries have been surveyed. The major tributaries.
And like with our work, we do tend to have the same areas being surveyed over and over again. And one of the great things with getting some more well-trained and dedicated volunteers has been that they will take on some areas with less previous search effort, which helps us in some cases to build knowledge of places that there are wood turtles. It's quite hard to know for certain they're not there just because they weren't seen. It could have been just the day chance. But that has been one of the benefits of growing our volunteer community, is we can cover more ground. So we had that stream or river habitat. You'll need some type of sandy nesting substrate. So this could be a natural nesting bar, or in a lot of cases, it could be human-made or human-impacted types of habitats. So we see lots of turtles nesting in the gravel shoulder of roads, on gravel roads. We work a lot with the agricultural community, so see them quite often, and kind of field margins and other places that, like, we have some areas with quite sandy soils, like around Wilmot, Aylesford, but good sun exposure because they want warm temperatures, and sandy gravel type of substrate. And then our third habitat type is some type of foraging area, so forested area, but it could also be like a shrubby riparian area. We see, again, in some of the properties we work with, agricultural fields where there's wood turtles foraging for slugs and other insects in those grassy fields as well. And so this slide up here is some examples of habitats where we've found wood turtles in our own watershed. They might look different than your area, but this is kind of some of the places that we're looking at. And on the top right, it's kind of a great example of why we try to get out in May before all the vegetation has leafed out. So this is a volunteer who is assisting with radio telemetry, which is fantastic because you don't have to have a clear sight to the ground to find the turtle. But if you can imagine trying to conduct a visual survey when you have that much plant cover, it's a lot of work if you're a human who stands up tall and cannot see the ground or cannot smell them. We're hoping for you guys to get out early enough in the season that there's still fairly open view to the ground, and you just have a much better chance of actually seeing something. Even the top left, you can see like the grass is as tall as the girls who are volunteering. So that was a radio telemetry day as well. And these are some examples of like those first moments where someone spotted a turtle and we snapped a photo. So in some cases, quite exposed and open and easy to see. But of course, there are going to be times when they're partially or almost fully covered by leaf litter or tucked nice and far into an undercut bank of the river. And sometimes in our cases, we know that because, again, we're doing radio telemetry and end up figuring out where they are. In some cases, especially when I have lots of kids out, they're much better at digging around in leaf piles, it seems. And so they find some of those hidden turtles. And they're also good at like army crawling through alder shrubs.
Good life skills.
Yeah. So there's one of those little guys like we've found, and he was quite exposed when we did find him.
Katie, do you see them many times in alders or?
Yeah. Lots, lots of time crawling around in alders.
I thought that would be a good spot for them.
So we're really just going to focus on visual surveys today. And so the hope, I think, with adding visual surveys to the programs that you guys are involved in is to start gathering more like long-term information about individuals. I think there's been a pretty large amount of effort, and I imagine a lot of the turtles in that area when they were first found have been notched, so it's like there should be lots of opportunity to capture mark recapture data. Does that sound right? Some notching effort up there?
Yeah, we've notched several hundred.
Mm-hmm.
And The question at this point, Katie, is whether or not those notches are still actually visible this many years later. It's been 10 years or so since the end of the project that we had on the St. Mary's, and Scott will remember some of this. And you know, the project on the St. Mary's lasted about 10 years. It started indirectly in 1989, and then took a bit of a hiatus, and then it was on again for 13 years, and then it's probably been another 10 years since there's been much work done. So that'll be interesting to see if there's those recaptures can be readily identified.
Yeah, and we've found quite a few individuals in our area that were notched around 2005 and 2006 by DNR, and they were pretty dull notches. So in those cases, we'll go in and just kind of freshen them up so they look like a much more distinct notch. Yesterday, we happened to be out on a farm and came across a mortality, so shell, no soft tissue or anything left in it. And we'd found the turtle 3 years ago and kind of cleaned up those notches so they were really visible. But he was first notched in 2006, and he was reported to have 21 rings on his annuli at that point in time, and we're 15 years later. So it was probably a nice
Good
old man.
Yeah, depending on the substrate that they're crawling over, there might not be as much chipping if you've got more sandy substrate in your area, and you would that part of the valley. So
yeah, he was in really nice shape for a
Yeah.
turtle of at least
Yeah.
30 years. I mean, except the mortality piece, but
He's really in really nice shape, except for being dead.
we had a better day.
yeah. But I mean, aside from visual surveys, a couple of years ago, we'd been working with some partners to develop a protocol for fixed transects. So the point of those was to control for effort, to try and better be able to compare data from different areas and being taken by different groups. And we've done some of that, but I don't know that others really have. So it kind of just fell to the wayside, as things seem to do. And we still do nesting surveys when we can with volunteers. So they're out through the month of June looking for active nesting. And then when there's a case where we actually see those eggs being laid and covered, we'll put a protective enclosure on top to keep predators out, and then have those monitored until they hatch, usually late September or October. It depends on the temperature for the year. Usually warmer years, you're going to see faster development and earlier emergence. And this year, we'll be doing some radio telemetry again. So MTRI, Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute, has some GPS and radio units that we'll use in combination and equip up to 6 turtles. And that will kind of pair well and augment some of the work that Mike Parker at East Coast Aquatics has been doing with similar units through kind of the area of the 104 twinning. So now we get into the real survey stuff. And I know some of it is dry, but that's why we're here tonight. So we'll start with our effort cards. And we use these to keep a record of every time volunteers or staff go out and contribute effort towards any type of surveys. And in our case, it'll be visual surveys. So even when a turtle is not observed, an effort card should be completed. It's kind of the first thing you do when you're out in the field, is start your card by putting in your population and all. I imagine the population code is SMR for St. Mary's River, but that's something you can check and send to you. There is a shared database that groups have access to in the province that's password protected, and so that code will be in there. And we also divide, so there's kind of 3 levels of division for location. So we start with the population, which is usually noted by the watershed that they're in. We then have the area. So a lot of the time in our cases, the area would be a tributary or a section of the Annapolis River. And there's already existing areas designated on the St. Mary's River. So again, we'll pull whatever information we can from the database. And for some that maybe don't have assigned areas where like the Nature Trust is managing specific properties, maybe it makes sense to kind of use those as your area codes. That's something, I guess, one person will have to decide just to ensure they remain consistent, share that information with volunteers, and then everyone can make sure they're using the right area when they're out on surveys. And then if we just quickly jump down to the table, can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so if I make reference to it, you can actually see it, which is great. So in the section name, a lot of the time our sections are named after the access point. And so again, there'll be some existing sections for St. Mary's River that we can pull, but that's something that might need to be generated if there's new survey sites for you guys. And that's just to help connect information about the same place over time. So they're meant to be consistent codes between surveys and between years of surveys. If we jump up back to the top, we have the year, the date. And I know it's just a little thing, but if you end up with a pile of data cards to enter, it's really nice if people write the number, the month in words, and then the year, because there's no mistaking that for anything else. But the day, month, year, even if you have DDMMYY on your sheet, you get all sorts of things. So just write the name of the month. It's usually like a solid way to interpret it. And project is usually something pretty simple. So we use CARP, our organization name. That's just something that you guys will have to decide. So maybe it's your organization names or a hybrid, depending on who you're going out with. And then we'd indicate our target species, which in this case will be the wood turtle. And we'll write all of our observer names down. And vol effort is vol short form for volunteer. But you can't calculate that until the end. So you can see here there's a note to say the total volunteer effort includes both your time on site as well as any prep and travel time that happens. And so one of the reasons this is included is if you're a group like ours and the in-kind contribution of all your volunteers is something that helps you to leverage funds, it's really valuable to have all of that recorded on a card. So end of the season, you can really quickly enumerate how much time your volunteers were contributing to a program.
Very smart. I had not thought of that.
It's usually left blank, but you can try. And then at the bottom, on the back of this card, there is a list of the kind of codes, so you don't have to memorize them. So you'll see V is for visual survey. And if we jump back up, our activity, V for visual survey, the number of people who are with you, which might change over the course of a series of surveys at different sections in a day. And then your start time. Later on, when you're finished, you'll come back and put your end time, preferably in 24-hour time. Usually it's pretty easy to figure out if someone made a mistake. They're not out at 2 in the morning, unless it's a nesting survey. And then we have our weather codes. They're all pretty straightforward. So I'll flip to the back again so you can see what your options are. For precipitation, we have none, drizzle or mist, a light rain, moderate to heavy rain, snow flurries, or other. It's not like a perfect system, just use your discretion and choose which one it is. It's not a perfect science of precipitation codes. And then wind speed is one that I always get hung up on because calm is your lightest option. It's like your none option. But to me, I could interpret calm as like a gentle wind, but it's the none selection. And then light, moderate, and strong. We also have percent cloud cover. So, I mean, really to the nearest 5 or 10%, it's not a perfect science either. Easy way to do it, if you look up in the sky and think of an area that's covered by 10 palm prints, and behind 3 of those palm prints were clouds, you're about 30% cloud cover. And that's about as precise as you need to be for the purpose of this card. And then at the end of the survey, You'll add any observations you made, including incidental observations of other species. And this is an older version of the card. The newer one we have actually doesn't have this summary of trap catch data on the back. What it has is a place where you can summarize any observations that you made. There is a separate observation card, and we're going to look at that shortly. But sometimes things get separated or misplaced, so it's just nice if you have the new cards to fill out that note. It'll ask you the turtle number, location, those details, or just in the comments section, I found turtle number 537 and I saw one predated nest, just in case, again, your observation cards happen to go missing. So that is our effort card. Any questions about that? It's a pretty straightforward one. Okay. We then have the turtle observation card. So you can use this for any species. So you might be out looking for wood turtles, but come across a snapping turtle and choose to fill one of these out. There's probably just going to be a few more blanks in the case that it's a snapping turtle. And so first thing you'll do, we'll say we stumbled across a wood turtle. We're going to check the species. And I might jump back and forth between this slide and some of the following ones so I can explain what some of these things mean. So you can see one of our first options on here is notches, and notches help us to determine the turtle number. So I'm going to skip ahead so we can take a look at notches. So on here, you should be able to see a turtle on the left who has been notched, and whenever you're looking at the turtle and you're going to start counting the notches, you want to make sure it's lined up so his carapace, its top shell, is on the top and the head is facing up or away from you. And you're going to count the left-hand side first and then the right-hand side. And what we're counting is those marginal scoots, so those scoots on the outside of the shell. So glad you can see my cursor. So here we have scoot 1 on the left, scoot 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 has a notch. If we go to the other side, we can see scoot number 2, 8, and 10 have notches on them. One thing you'll want to look out for is sometimes you're going to have these kind of what almost look like notches in the places where two scoots would join each other, so kind of above where my cursor is now. Ideally, when someone initially notched the turtle, the scoot went in, or the notch went into the center of that scoot. So if it's off to the edge, probably not a notch you're looking at. It's just the change between scoots. And this is quite a nice intact turtle, but sometimes they will be quite chipped up. So you've got to kind of keep an eye out for, you know, what's a notch and what's just a chip. And then also, if it's a more recent chip, you know, did that chip happen in a place that used to have a notch? And all of a sudden it's kind of throwing you off the trail of figuring out your turtle number. But you're going to do your best to count those notches. And each notch corresponds to a number. So you can see up here, scoot 1 on the left corresponds to 2,000. Scoot 8 on the right corresponds to the number 40. And it's possible for wood turtles to have 11 or 12 scoots, marginal scoots on each side. And they could have 11 and 12, or 12 and 11. Really, it shouldn't matter because you can see scoot 12 on the bottom here isn't assigned a notch code anyway. So it shouldn't be counted in unless something has gone awry. And this is a sheet that you'd have with you in the field, so it's not like you have to memorize the codes. So if we take a look here, this turtle, we have all the numbers that the corresponding scoots come out to, and we would sum those numbers. So we have 400 plus 40 plus 20 plus 4 gives us 464, which is our turtle number. And then we would have, in our case, we have a field sheet, and we can go onto the database and create a field sheet for turtles in the St. Mary's River. They don't have to have a name. We do it for fun. I know some people hate that, like anthropomorphizing turtles is sometimes a great way to get community members engaged in the program though. So we said we had turtle 464, which is Eden. We have the notch code that we could confirm that with. Under these blue boxes is where we would have the area and section so that you could just take a double check and go, okay, am I actually in that place? Because there are a few instances where there's turtles that have been assigned the same notch code. But in like one case, there's one in your watershed that we also have here. And like, I know if I find that turtle, okay, it's not the St. Mary's River watershed one, it's the Annapolis one. So having all of that additional information on the field sheet just lets you double check that type of thing. And we also include whether it's a male and adult. With wood turtles, they're not going to necessarily, you're not going to be able to tell until they're 15 years or so of age whether they're male or female. And that kind of jumps us into another topic that I can move right into. But, oh, I didn't include pictures on this. Shoot. So here we're looking at some of the plastrons of wood turtles. Once wood turtles have reached sexual maturity, if it is a male, the bottom shell is going to have a concave shape, so kind of a scooped out shape, and females are going to remain as flat as I can put my hand. They're going to be flat. And if you think about how turtles reproduce, really easy way to remember that the males fit on top of there like a puzzle. And it's not so easy to tell from the photos here, but I would reckon this top photo and the bottom are males, just with like the way the wear pattern is, and that the other ones, my eyes have a hard time telling just from photo, but in the fields, it's relatively easy to discern that concave shape versus flat. When they're younger, you can see on here, we'll just have a U for unidentified because we can't tell yet if it's male or female. There's definitely cases where we have turtles we know were notched years ago and they were indicated to be one sex, and provided we've got the code right, they're definitely not. And usually they were indicated to be females, and then all of a sudden they're looking a lot like males, like 5-10 years later, and they were probably just not sexually mature is what my guess would be. Does that make sense for notch codes? And so we have some volunteers in our program who are trained to actually notch turtles, although it's relatively few. We just make sure people have kind of lots of supervised practice before they get to that point. We definitely don't encourage people, actually tell them straight up, don't just go out and start notching turtles just for the sake of it. Wait until you're on someone's species at risk permit and you have the training, and then the notching can come. But one of the great things is your area, you do have quite a lot of notched turtles, so you'll have a good chance, hopefully, of finding a previously notched turtle, in which case you're just counting the existing code, bearing that it can be seen still. So we would use that information to write the notches. So I write L and then the numbers separated by a comma, and then write numbers separated by a comma. Not everyone writes the R and L or L and R. You can't get it wrong if it's there to me. And then the turtle number that you figured it out based on that notch code. It has a name. If you can tell the sex. Gravid refers to whether it's carrying eggs or not. We don't ask our volunteers to guess that. So you can probe, and I can't with any confidence just visually tell whether a turtle's gravid. I'm sure there's more experienced people who can, but for us, it's just beyond the scope of what we'd be asking a volunteer to do anyway.
Does your permit allow volunteers to handle the turtles or just look at them as just visually observe them?
We kind of have different levels within our permit. So there are some volunteers, once they have sufficient training and field time with staff, they can handle them and take measurements.
Okay.
It's only 2 volunteers who can notch. The rest is just staff. And we've been pretty conservative about trying to expand that.
One other question, Katie, quickly. Under turtle number, what's the W and S? Is it something really obvious I'm just not seeing at the moment? Right after.
No, I actually don't know that. I never have.
Okay. All right. No, thanks for that. I've been looking at it and puzzled as to what that might mean.
I just put the turtle number, and that's
Okay.
and all the database has his turtle number as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
I'll ask Jeffy and see if there's something. So our date, again, if you can write out the month in letters, that's great. And time in 24-hour time. And then we have our capture type. So if we came across a turtle and it has no notches, it, of course, maybe has been seen before, but for our purposes, we would consider it a first capture. It's an unmarked turtle. So it's maybe a bit of a misleading name for that option. Whereas a turtle that has been notched would be a recapture. We have, actually the reason I have that slide of all the plastrons here is we do have a volunteer who is out quite regularly. He lives in an area with wood turtles and can't notch them, but by taking really good photos of the plastrons and using those patterns, we can match them to an individual. So if we have a reference photo from when the turtle was notched, we can use that to figure out who it was. Because, I mean, they're really beautiful if you look at these different shapes and all quite unique. So you may run into cases where the turtle escapes, especially if they're in water. They're much faster. Or if they throw themselves off the bank into the water and swim away. Otherwise, I mean, one of the things I find nice about working with wood turtles when they're on the land is they just kind of sit there. So it's a great species.
Not like painted turtles.
No, much less skittish.
Yeah.
You may find a predated nest. We don't actually fill out a full turtle observation card if we see a predated nest. We just note that on the effort card. And we really are trying to do a better job at getting everyone to record observations of predated nests because, like, we know with all our species there's pretty high rates of predation, but we don't have a lot of good data about it. And in some cases, there have been groups who kind of want to look at protecting snapping turtle nests. But right now, one of the pieces of information that has been kind of limiting whether they get approved to do that or not is just like that gap in data about like what is the rate of predation? Is this actually needed yet? And so I personally wouldn't pull out a whole observation card just to note a predated nest, but if you can write it on your effort card or take a note of it, then that's great information to have. And also grab a photo if you can. Do
you actually, you don't record the GPS coordinates for it, just so you have a record of an actual nesting beach?
Yes, I would put like the location in there as well.
Right. Okay.
It's just most of the other fields don't actually, they're not applicable for a predated nest, so that's why I just added as a note on the comment card. And I don't know how anyone would ever find an intact nest only without seeing the turtle there, like unless you're some type of turtle whisperer or have, like, that's just not going to happen. Once they conceal those nests and leave, we're done guessing at where they are. I mean, you might know that it's a habitat, it's nesting beach, but yeah, never use that checkbox personally. Whether it's alive or dead, hopefully most of them will be alive for you guys. And our handling type, so I think in a lot of cases for you guys, they'll probably either be not handled, so you'll just be taking photographs and completing as much information on the cards as possible, or there might be an opportunity to get some people trained so that measurements can be taken in the field, in which case, once you release them back into the exact same place that you found them, you'd check handled and released on site. And I don't think there'll be any cases for you guys where they'd be handled and brought into the lab. We'll run into that maybe up to our 6 times when we're equipping transmitter units, because they'll come in overnight so the epoxy can set before we release them again. You'll choose your sighting method. So in most cases for you guys, it'll be a visual survey. It could be though that you're a volunteer or staff member involved in another project. Maybe you're doing water quality sampling or something, and you happen to observe a wood turtle. So you do have an option down here for incidental to other research. So the concerted effort wasn't looking for wood turtles, you just got lucky. When we have like a member of the public call in an observation, that is when I mark general observation, and then often over the phone or text or messenger or whatever, there's so many options now, we work through the card to get as much information as possible. And then there are some trained dogs out there, but for people who might be out with the dog and it's not got formal wood turtle tracking training, you can check dog survey, and it is called a informal helper. Those are probably your most likely options. Probably visual survey is going to be what you're doing most of the time. We can just skip this sighting type if you're not doing radio telemetry. It's not applicable. Up on the right-hand side, the person who wrote the card and both the first and last name of any additional observers. Your project population area and section should all correspond to what you completed on the effort card. So they help to identify the area in which you're conducting your survey. If there's fixed landmarks that could be used, like I think of this as what could I use to navigate back to the site for location description. You'll see on the reverse, there's a place to describe the habitat in a little more detail.
Katie, is Jeffy still the keeper of all the data?
Yeah.
And is she requiring, and I just say this, I'm asked the question for consistency's sake across the province, because I'm doing a training session with UINR next week, an online session. It's very similar to this one. And I just want to make sure the message is going out consistently across the province. Is Jeffy asking for any digital mapping with bounds on it so that there's no database, actual spatial database that looks at that?
No, there's not right now.
Okay.
Like we, again, organizationally collect tracks and we put it into our, like we'll map it out and we kind of have it sitting there, but right now there's nowhere to upload that geospatial information onto the database.
But I suppose there is probably an easting and northing for the start and the finish.
On this one, it's just the point of observation for the turtle, yeah.
Yeah.
But that is like, again, not requisite, so it doesn't have to go in the database, but something that we ask when people are doing more formal surveys, particularly in areas with no or very little previous search effort, then we ask for that like up and downstream point, because otherwise we'd have no idea what's been covered or not.
Exactly. That's what I was wondering. Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, for location on here, either a lat long or a UTM. I happen to be biased towards preferring UTMs, but do what you can. There's so many apps. If you have a smartphone, you can find one. Just figure out how to switch to different displays. Your source of information and the accuracy. The default we usually go with for a GPS unit is a 10-meter accuracy, unless you're actually getting information that tells you otherwise. If you have a more precise GPS, I've gone out with a friend from AGRG before, and they had a super precise GPS, but our kind of standard Garmin, we just go with a 10-meter default for the accuracy. Our weather, so precipitation, wind, cloud cover, and temperature, you're going to record what's happening at that moment you find the turtle. So it may be different than when you started the survey. And when you see temperature, so air temperature, that's pretty straightforward. Water temperature, if there is a close by source of water, which, I mean, often a water course is the way we're kind of choosing locations. And then at the turtle, so if I found a turtle in thick grass, I set my thermometer kind of in that position where I found the turtle, just to see if there's a difference between ambient air temperature and that more precise position where the turtle was found. And we've actually never done anything with that data, but I think the idea is that it's all being collected so that if someone did want to do a research project, then they have access to as complete of a data set as possible. And then we get into our options for behavior. And so again, this is going to be like your discretion and best guess as to what you're seeing. So there's a series of options for terrestrial, so meaning they're on land, aquatic, so they're in the water, were they eating, so usually pretty conspicuous with a worm hanging out of their mouth, aggression and courtship or copulating, and then nest search and attempt. With that one, if you're kind of unsure of how would you know, like one of the first things to think about is, are you in the right type of habitat? So are you in that sandy, gravelly type of substrate, good sun exposure? Because if you're not in nesting habitat, it's very unlikely you're witnessing a nest search or attempt. We have position, and this is all pretty straightforward. So how kind of clear a view did you have to it? So you'll choose one from either in water or on land. And then whether it was in water or land, you'll do the nearest to the opposite. So if it was on land, was it 2 meters to the water? Or if it was in the water, was it half a meter to land? Habitat at capture. So we have terrestrial, so on land. We have normally aquatic. I found this is one of those like language things that throws people off because it sounds kind of funny. So it's kind of like your water course in the bank full width. So it is an aquatic habitat year round. And then flooded would be something more like an ephemeral pool, or if it's springtime and you get kind of that like flooding in a riparian forest area. So you know it's only seasonally wet, but it's covered in water now. That's that flooded option. And perch, we're just going to choose whatever we find it on. If other, then write in a note as to the other. And your general habitat description. Again, we don't ask for a ton of detail here from volunteers. So something like alder riparian area or cornfields. We get cornfields quite often. So pretty high level, just to the best of the individual's ability, make some notes about the dominant vegetation type and the habitat features that you see around you. And we then have measurements. So I'm going to jump to another diagram as I talk through measurements, but they would all go on this side of the card. And actually, just skipping ahead on the card a little bit, the procedures at the bottom, really aside from taking really nice photos, you can forget about the other ones because you won't be doing any scanning or blood sampling or transmitter attachment or removal. So a lot of this bottom section won't be applicable for us in this case. So again, we always have cheat sheets in our staff and volunteer kits to describe the measurements that need to be taken. So we have CL for carapace length, and that is the maximum length. Much easier on this like this turtle with no body and moving limbs. You will find if you're taking measurements when you pick up the turtle, it's like kind of an awkward sandwich hold, but they've got nice strong legs and they will try and push you away. So if your hands are too far back, they're going to be pushing off. If you hold it too close to your body, anything that can leverage against is going to push away. So working around the flailing turtle, you're going to measure the maximum length from kind of head to tail. We then have two measurements for width on the carapace, or the top shell. So we have width, so just CW, and CW bridge. And I mean, I think about this as like your hip and waist measurement. So the wide point is your hips or your CW. And then there's often like a taper or a more narrow point on the shell, which is like the waist. And that's where you will take the CW bridge. Although the thing I do find tricky is like for people, they're often not confident where should that bridge width be taken versus where is the shell just starting to round at the front and it's getting more narrow. So that's where like having some time in the field and pointing out, working with volunteers with some experience, they can help show you where and that width and width bridge measurements get taken from. But your width should be wider than your width at the bridge. If they're not, something probably went wrong and just remeasure. So then flip the flailing turtle over and measure maximum length of the plastron. Width below the bridge. So this is where it's pretty hard on this black and white diagram to see, but on the turtle, you'll want to look for where the scutes are kind of fusing together, and you can see that clear distinction between the top and bottom shell, and make sure you're just measuring the bottom shell, not accidentally measuring, like you can see this ridge along here, actually part of the carapace that just hangs over. So we wouldn't include that in our plastron width measurement. You can kind of see the lines in the diagram going in. And then height, nice and easy. It's like a turtle sandwich. And then one additional measurement. I have a photo here of a mesh bag. I actually don't recommend a mesh bag because they have tiny little claws that stick through them. So a more solid reusable grocery bag, and a plasticky one if you want to be able to wipe it out and sanitize it between uses. And this is just a spring scale, and you're going to take the weight in grams. I guess another small thing, I think this person's standing, but if you kneel and stay really close to the ground, you can't drop it far because there's not far to go. So you can see here, there's quite a few fields that get left blank for our measurement cards. So we're just doing CL, CW, CW bridge, PL, PW, and weight. We don't worry about this upper lip marking. For annuli, that's those rings. So you're going to do your best to count the number of growth rings on both the plastron and carapace, if it's possible. If you get a really old turtle with a lot of wear, sometimes you're not going to see a lot of rings present. So on these photos, you can see, particularly on the outside that drags more, not a lot of ring definition left. So I have some more photos of the top shell. Those photos you can't see the top so well, but I think one of the earlier ones here. So some of these we can still get a rough count of the number of rings. You can see these center scutes much more worn out, so you'll choose the best scoot. Usually I'll count 2 or 3 and get someone else to count, and then take the average from there. Especially as turtles start to age and they're not putting on new rings and they're actually just starting to wear down year after year, it's not going to be a particularly reliable count anyway. So it's just the best that you can do. Sorry, lost my card for a second here. Yeah, and then so For any other identifying features, so if there's chips, if you make a note like a scoot left 4 had a chip, maybe one that's not likely to have a chip, but whichever scoot had chips in it. If it was an amputee, maybe it's missing its front leg or missing its tail. Anything that's really unique about that turtle can go in that identifying feature section. And then for photos, what I like to do is get my first photo with the front of the data card in the frame so that I know this series of images is coming from this turtle, notch code and number. And then if I can, on top of a clipboard or another solid surface, get a good photo straight down of the carapace, of the turtle flipped over, of the plastron, of all 4 sides. And then get your post photo with no people in it, because we can't share the ones of them being handled. So I don't write my photo numbers on the data card. I just end up doing that, take the photo with the card in view, and I know that series of photos gets matched to the turtle. And then the hardest thing is to go home and label your photos properly so you can keep track of them. And we're not going to talk about nesting today, but these are photos of nesting females in our watershed area, and a picture of a protective cover right on the shoulder of a small bridge road.
Katie, just a point of interest with the nesting, we've covered many nests in the St. Mary's over the years, and there was a visiting professor from Michigan came, and one of his grad students did a comparative study of differences in incubation between nests that were covered and nests that weren't. And the nests that were covered, the hatchlings didn't emerge for several days after the ones that were uncovered because of the shading effect.
Oh.
It was quite a revelation to us, because we've been putting covers over nests for many years, but it was significant to the point of several days, like 4, 5, 6 days in the difference, just because of the angle of the sun, perhaps, you know,
Yeah.
the aspect of the nest, and how what reminded me of it was the picture you just showed there of the rocks.
Yeah, very heavy
so
cover.
raccoons couldn't flip it. But those rocks and even that 2x4 edge is enough to cast shade over the nest.
Yeah, so maybe like 1x2 or 2x2, and then a bigger dimension would be better.
Yeah, or I mean, even yeah, certainly a bigger dimension. I mean, I've used that same format that you've got there for 20 years, and it was just something that we hadn't thought about. We thought we were doing a good thing, right?
Yeah, it seems so obvious when you say it.
Yeah, well, it was just one of the things that we found out that summer. Anyway, I think he published on it, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like we can do nest training. I usually just wait till closer to nesting season if like COVID things are looking good and there's opportunity for volunteers to go out. But we're just sticking to visual surveys for today. We do have kind of a written guide that reiterates all of this information that I can share. We've got our printed data cards that we can distribute. We've been able to get some calipers and scales and other things to make some kits for your groups to be able to go out and use. So we do like this kind of is your basic list of everything that you would need. Triangular files in red, because that's just if you are trained to notch. One point that I didn't really clearly bring up, but all of this is activity that in our case our volunteers participate in through a species at risk research permit that Clean Annapolis River Project holds. Were someone to go out on their own as an individual and be handling a turtle and measuring, it would actually be a illegal activity and can have negative repercussions for the person. So we do really want people to come out, get sufficient training, make sure that they get added onto our permit so that they can go out and conduct activities independently. Don't just run out right away and go wild with turtles. And so there'll be like both and Nature Trust and St. Mary's River Association have put in permit applications so that there would be opportunities for volunteers to join those organizations to support their work. A couple of other things is just start to wrap up. I mean, aside from the bad photo op here on the left, it's just like, it just don't pick up turtles by their tail.
What turtle?
Yeah. Their spines are fused to their shell. This is not a good thing for them. But I think everyone in this group knows that. More subtle things, like this photo inherently doesn't look so bad, right? Like the turtle's alert and he's alive. But we have become, as we've learned more as an organization, become much more vigilant in not sharing photos that show people handling turtles unless it is going alongside some type of explanation about a research program or why that action is happening. So even though you don't see a lot of the person, it still can give the wrong message about the appropriateness of handling turtles. So
it normalizes it.
Yeah,
Is what
exactly.
it does. It makes it normal, so people think it's okay to just reach out and pick up the turtle.
Yep. So that's where just making
Right.
sure you get a nice photo of the turtle in its habitat without you. No selfies.
Something I was just reading the other day too, even when you're handling turtles, for those of us that have done a lot of it, I was reading on a website where there's actually a specific way to hold them and turn them and flip them and a time frame, because apparently their organs can twist really easy. And so if you were turning the turtle over, you would want to turn it over face first. So flip it from back end, whatever the way you're holding it, the tail's towards your chest or stomach, and you want to flip it over and take 2 seconds to do it, like this,
like a somersault.
like a somersault. Yes, do it like that, but much slower.
Okay.
Like literally 2 seconds to turn it over, to hold it, and then 2 seconds and bring it back. Don't keep it going don't keep going in the same direction. Do it just exactly as you just did there, Katie. So interesting. This was a turtle group again in the States that specialized in rehabbing and handling turtles. And something again that I hadn't thought of in that way, in terms of the speed at which you did things.
Yeah.
And how many times have you held a turtle in your hand and then pointed this way or that way with it and said, oh, look at this or look at that? Well, they claim that even that kind of motion is enough to twist the organs. So again, I have no idea. I have no idea what the impact of the handling that I've done with turtles, or the students that I've have done with turtles. When I think about it, if that's the case, we might want to add that to the threats list. So
That's
yeah.
good to know though, because an easy thing, like an easy behavior modification for us.
Well, it is. I mean, we always talk about handling turtles with respect, and that's, number one, and you've already done a great job of that, and with examples, and your point about not being too far off the ground or not off the ground at all if you don't have to. But just something else to keep in mind that I'm going to mention when I have to do my session is just, I think it's just no unnecessary movement or no movement that's considered quick. Basically fast. So
yeah. And then the last photo on here is one like I'd mentioned, we take a photo of each side. But even this, like, even though there's no person handling it, like, this is not something we would want shared, because again, it doesn't give the right impression about what you're in. It would just be confusing for people. Like, so overall, just best to avoid any sharing of photos on social media or other places that can be in any way accidentally taken out of context. And for anyone who's spent time on social media, it's super easy for that to happen. So so again, this is kind of written for our volunteers. So some key points that we emphasize with our volunteers is that we absolutely want people to participate in in-field training, not just a virtual session. I know that's going to become more complicated with COVID, but we can figure out options to the best of what can happen for the year. Volunteers do need to be on someone's permit to participate in activities and make sure they have a clear understanding of what they're allowed to do. Do like to emphasize for people to complete their data cards, particularly the effort card. It's not that it's more important, it's just so boring that people don't bother filling it out. And then we lose that really valuable information. Getting good photos, especially in the case that notches can't be taken, and we can use those photos for identifying individuals. Take a GPS point in addition to writing it down, but always write it down in addition to taking the point. So just don't assume it's going to be a waypoint in your GPS unit, because some disaster will happen. Survey based on your skill, experience, and comfort level. So particularly when people get to that point that they're going to be heading out independently, like it is, you still have to be safe during them. So make sure site selection is appropriate. If like in our area, we're working a lot on different private lands, so make sure you have permission to access areas. And for our volunteers, like if someone's going out on their own, I'm not going to stop them necessarily. I prefer if people went out in partners, but we give people the option to text us and just give a sense of location and approximate time, so at least someone in this world knows where they were planning to be. Kind of those general good practices for spending time outdoors. And then be aware of what you're sharing, particularly on social media, and how it might be interpreted or misinterpreted. And that is kind of the content for tonight. Were there questions at this point?
No, I think you did a great job. Thank you.
Oh, I have one. It's kind of only semi-related, but I was wondering, have you come across evidence that wood turtles in your area are taken as pets sometimes or returned?
We found one turtle that had a very obviously human-made hole through the back of the shell, where I imagine someone tethered it for a while, and it was a very residential community. So I imagine he spent a few years of his life as a tethered pet. And I know there's some.
What happened to getting an aquarium?
There's some turtles at the Oakland Farm Zoo who had a similar backstory, and so there you can see their tether holes on the back of their shell.
We had as many as 6% of all of our turtles were actually, for the first couple of years. Now, mind you, like I say, we marked almost 1,000 turtles.
Wow.
And but for the first couple of years, when our numbers were down around 150 to 200, 6% of them actually had tether holes. So
oh my goodness,
it was quite a thing in the St. Mary's. A lot of families had their own pet turtle.
right?
Whoa.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was that common. That's like a significant percentage.
Yeah,
it
we
is.
found one, and we do. If only these people called like an hour before. We do sometimes have cases where people relocate a turtle with the best intentions. Particularly, it's during the nesting season, and females are probably moving to their nesting territories, and people are concerned about their safety on roads and bring them to the pond in their backyard.
Mm-hmm.
So that, yeah, don't do that. If you can help the turtle cross the road in the direction of travel, that's probably the best option for you and the turtle.
Hi, I was just gonna, Lisa Doucette here. Hello, guys.
Hey.
I think I know most of the people on this call. I just wanted to make a comment and or query about covering nests, and it was really interesting what Mark was saying about, that it could prolong the incubation period. And so I've done a lot of work on with other reptiles, temperature-dependent sex determination, and I know wood turtles don't have that, but I believe snapping turtles do. And so covering the nest, you really could be changing a whole nest from one sex to another, which could have major population implications. So I just wanted to raise that point. A covering nest has always worried me because of potential temperature effects.
That is completely valid.
Something
I
we
had
never
not thought of
ever
it.
do with something that I spent a large part of reptiles are all the species there are temperature dependent sex determination, and covering a nest would be very detrimental. So just something to think about, especially with snapping turtles, because I do believe they have the gene for temperature dependent sex determination.
Yeah, they do. Just something to keep in mind too. I mean, in some ways it's a bit of a trade-off, because at least with the wood turtles, and the point was made earlier with the mortality of the rate of the nests. And most years we experienced at least 40 and sometimes as much as 80% nest failure as a result of raccoons in particular digging up the nests. And so if you're weighing that against, I guess, with wood turtles in particular, a delayed incubation, there still may be a net value in that. Now with snappers, obviously it's going to be a bit different. But again, depending on all this subsidized predation that we have, I guess, basically as a result of farming and things like that, and basically people's, how they handle or manage their waste and things like that. The reference you might want to look for, I don't have it in front of me, but Lisa in particular, anybody, Dean McCurdy was the gentleman he was the prof from Michigan. So Dean McCurdy, he did the work. And let me think, he had a student, her first name was Lake, L-A-K-E, and she would have been a co-publisher on that paper. But anyway, it's been 20 years now, I suspect, anyway, since that. But that's the publication anyway. You might want to try to scope out a little bit just to see. But again, it's...
So University of Michigan, do you know the university? No, by chance?
University of Ann Arbor?
I can probably
it might be in Ann Arbor or something, but I'm sure that...
that sounds like a good possibility.
I'm sure that ResearchGate, probably if you look up Dean McCurdy, you'll see something.
Yeah.
I have a...
No, I just heard it was 20 years ago. I was all set to do that, Mark, and then I went, ooh, 20 years ago. I don't think you posted it yesterday.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be too worried, like say, about a delay of I mean, obviously you want to try to mitigate against having that effect of delaying and hatching by a few days, but the sex determination could be a big one. So definitely want to avoid anything that would change those temperatures too much. It's a climate change issue too, so it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about.
I bet you do, yeah.
Joanna?
Just a different question. I was speaking to Charlie McGinnis, who's been doing the St. Mary's River restoration project the last number of years, and he was talking about how the groins that they've put in a number of locations, so the rocky barriers on an angle to deflect flow, they fill in at the top end with gravel and sand. And he said he's seen them used a number of times by wood turtles. And so I was wondering, either Katie or Mark, if you have any idea if that would, would that be good nesting habitat, or would it turn out to be a type of ecological trap? I wasn't sure when he told me.
Yeah, I've talked to Charlie about that in particular. And I think in some ways they end up being ecological traps. It happens on the river quite a bit. I mean, we have these unintended consequences of doing things like rip-wrapping riverbanks to prevent erosion that's going to be detrimental to salmonids. And yet when we rip-wrap, we have to do it in a very special way so that you don't create these interstitial spaces that turtles fall into and can't get out of.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we used to do on the St. Mary's, and again, Scott, if he's still on the call here, whatever, may remember this, is that after you put in your larger coarser stone, you backfill or you top dress it with smaller gravel, so to fill in those interstitial spaces. So one of the things that we used to find on the St. Mary's back in 2000, between 2000, 2010 in particular, was that the St. Mary's was a very flashy river. It would come up and go down very, very quickly. And we had a lot of mortality as a result of these 1 in 50-year storms that were happening, twice, 3 times a summer. And that the water would come up 2 meters and flood all these nesting areas. And so these groins that he's talking about, they at first glance are very appealing to females, and they'll certainly use them. But again, I don't think there's a great success with them. So it is a bit of a problem, basically. So climate change and everything's happening. We're not getting the ice scouring on the St. Mary's that's happened in the past, and we're not getting the deposition of sediments downstream on turns in the river. So we're not getting those thalwags created that create those nesting opportunities as much as we used to. Because so anyway, I'm gonna be quiet. This is Katie's day.
No, well, one of the things is really remarkable is how different the habitat is. Like I did some surveys with Mike Parker along the 104 at a variety of sites last year, and it looks nothing like the Annapolis.
No.
We find so fewer natural nesting bars. There's a few tributaries that's really nice, but otherwise we're primarily monitoring nesting in like residential developments, farm fields, sides of roads, like very anthropogenic types of habitats. Yeah, just incredibly different.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? Now's your chance. Well, Katie, I think you might as well wrap up.
Okay, well, thank you everyone. And I'll stay in touch and we'll figure out our plans for either getting out or not, but we're gonna try.
That sounds good. I really did. You did a great job. I really enjoyed this tonight. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks
Joanna,
Katie for
as
doing
well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, have a great evening, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.